Yes, good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to present an update on the efforts that we're making at Cardiol Therapeutics to develop new important therapeutics for very debilitating and life-threatening heart diseases. Cardiol has focused in the area of anti-inflammatory strategies for heart disease now for over 30 years, and we're pleased to now have two lead assets in phase 2 programs that are progressing well ahead of schedule, with our lead orphan drug program now completing enrollment, which was just announced this morning, and now positioning this important development effort to migrate to a potential pivotal registrational trial that will see our drug into commercialization with partnering with the dominant pharmaceutical industry. We also have a follow-on program from the lead program in recurrent pericarditis and acute myocarditis that is also tracking well ahead of schedule with respect to enrollment because of the growing problem of myocarditis, which remains a devastating, debilitating condition, which is the leading cause of sudden cardiac death or cardiac death in people under the age of 30. We'll touch on the scientific rationale, which is also supporting a new program in a much larger area of cardiac medicine, which is heart failure, which is arguably one of the largest medical challenges in the world today, affecting 26 million people in the developed world. We've developed a broad intellectual property and barriers to competitive entry, now adding to our comprehensive intellectual property portfolio the FDA orphan designation. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll introduce you to our teams and advisory panels that we believe are second to none in industry. And we're fortunate to be well capitalized with all our current ongoing programs fully funded and operations funded into 2026. The major features of Cardiol's clinical development pipeline are the two phase 2 assets, which are progressing, both anchored out of major research institutions in the United States. With respect to recurrent pericarditis, this is a US-focused trial, which has just completed its enrollment today and has just recently been granted Orphan-Drug designation, which provides the potential for an extended period of market exclusivity, accelerated regulatory cycles, and reduced developmental fees, and potentially fast-track designation. We also have, following in parallel, a global program in acute myocarditis that I'll describe in today's presentation. And then with respect to our research pipeline, we are looking forward to progressing into clinical development, a very exciting new asset targeted at one of the great medical challenges, which is heart failure. We are fortunate to be working with many of the preeminent cardiovascular research centers in the world, including the renowned Cleveland Clinic, which is one of the largest pericardial disease centers in the world today, if not the largest, and certainly a well-recognized international cardiac research institute. And we're also collaborating with other major preeminent cardiovascular research centers, including the Rochester Mayo, Mass General, Harvard, and other international centers with representation from Europe, Latin America, Canada, and Israel. The most important or the most advanced program is our Maverick pilot study. This study is focused on a very debilitating condition called recurrent pericarditis. Pericarditis is essentially inflammation in the sleeve that surrounds the heart or the sac around the heart. You can get swelling within the layers of this sac, which can cause very significant symptomatology in patients, severe chest pain, shortness of breath, depression, fever, marked reduction in quality of life. Many can be hospitalized for extended stays. These hospitalizations are quite costly. And then for those that don't respond to mild stage interventions such as non-steroidals or the generic colchicine, patients really only have one other option with respect to if they want to avoid steroids and the toxicology associated with steroids, which is a very potent medication. It's a very costly medication. It was approved in 2021 for the treatment of recurrent pericarditis. But because of its cost and because it's an immunosuppressive therapy, it's typically reserved as a third-line therapy for patients with multiple recurrences. There is a growing prevalence and recognition of the prevalence of this condition. There's 38,000 patients each year that suffer recurrence that can be candidates for a new form of therapy that Cardiol's focused on developing. And we're fortunate to have just received our lead drug being recognized as an orphan drug designation, which provides this company with a period of prolonged market exclusivity in a market with a growing need. At the late breaker scientific sessions of the American Heart Association, really the basis for our development program was formed, where we demonstrated in a highly translational experimental system that we could reduce pericardial space or normalize pericardial space. This increase in space is caused by pericardial effusion or fluid that can build up around the heart. And we also normalize pericardial thickness in this widely recognized translational experimental model of recurrent pericarditis. And it was this observation that attracted the attention of many of the world leaders in pericardial disease. Alan Klein is now the director of our program. He heads the advisory panel that assisted with the design of our program in collaboration with other international authorities well recognized in pericardial disease. And this formed the basis for Cardiol's Maverick program. Cardiol's Maverick study has just completed full enrollment. We announced that earlier this morning. In this study, we are studying the impact of our drug primarily as the primary endpoint on change in a pain index, a well-recognized numeric pain scale, which is the subject of many studies that look at pain. In this case, we're looking at an intractable chest pain. So patients are baseline on an 11-point numeric pain scale. They then receive 8 weeks of our therapy. Then they're reassessed on this important pain measure at 8 weeks. And we are now positioned, as we announced this morning, to report top-line results out of the primary endpoint during Q2. We also have an extension phase of this trial, which runs out to 26 weeks, which importantly is looking at high sensitivity measures of cardiac inflammation, such as C-reactive protein. And then we also look at the important recurrence rate, because the objective of this therapy is to modify the pain syndrome and then keep patients free of recurrence of the pain syndrome. Tracking in parallel with the recurrent pericarditis program, which is now tracking to read out in Q2, is the Archer program, which is recruiting well ahead of schedule. Currently, when we initiated this study in a debilitating form of heart muscle inflammation, we anticipated this program would take until Q1 2025. We're now tracking ahead of schedule to complete enrollment in this trial. We just recently reported we have surpassed the 50%. We're now well through the 50% enrollment rate in the study. And this study is looking at a devastating form of cardiac inflammation, which affects young people. And the real challenge of this condition is there's currently no recognized standard of care for acute myocarditis. There's no FDA-approved drug with a label claim. So typically, patient or cardiologists will look to therapeutics such as steroids, which have significant toxicology in the absence of no other recognized therapy. Tragically, this remains a leading cause of sudden cardiac death in people under the age of 35. Young people can develop fulminant heart failure at a very young age with no prior risk factors for cardiovascular disease, and some do progress to require cardiac transplantation. Patients can be hospitalized. These hospitalizations often involve the ICU, which can be very expensive at $110,000 per week. And there's a relatively high in-hospital mortality rate ranging 4 to 6%. Really, the basis for our interest in this area was the observation of our drug and its ability to protect the heart tissue during the persistent or dangerous phase of this disease. It's primarily caused by a viral infection, such as the flu virus or the COVID virus, which will invade the heart. The immune system will then activate against it, and it can cause what you see on the center of this slide, which is a fibrotic scarring, which can cause inelasticity in the heart and impair the ability of the heart to function normally. Interestingly, the left panel here is normal tissue. The right panel in the presence of disease with infusion of our drug. You can see the majority of the cardiac tissue is preserved. And this attracted a global panel of experts from around the world to collaborate with Cardiol on the design of what now is one of the largest clinical development programs ever conducted in acute myocarditis in over 30 years. This program is co-led by Les Cooper from the renowned Mayo Clinic, and he's the former head of the American Myocarditis Foundation, together with Dennis McNamara, who heads a prominent cardiac transplant unit, understanding that end-stage myocarditis can result in the necessity of a heart transplant. And these co-chairs are collaborating with international authorities from Europe, Latin America, throughout North America, and Israel. And it is this team that is overseeing, or this steering committee that is overseeing the conduct of the Archer program. The Archer program is now an international clinical platform. We are enrolling 100 patients at over 35 centers in Europe, Israel, Latin America, and North America. So it's a true global effort underway here. This study has surpassed 50% enrollment and is tracking well ahead of our current guidance with respect to enrollment. The primary endpoints for this study are the key prognosticating indicators to diagnose and look at prognosis in this disease, which is high precision cardiac imaging, or cardiac MRI, where we can precisely image that scarring tissue that I showed you on the previous slide. We then treat for 90 days, and then we re-image the heart's looking to see improvements in the extracellular volume and the cardiac performance in these patients. So we look forward to completing the enrollment of this trial during second half of this year, and this positions the company for its second phase 2 readout. And then running in parallel with our lead cardiac programs is a very important new drug effort with respect to the development of a new therapy to target heart failure. And I'm sure many of you are aware, but heart failure is a major medical challenge facing the developed world. It is driven by basically three forces, which is diabetes, high blood pressure and hypertension, and obesity. And it is these joint forces that are creating an epidemic in heart failure. It affects 26 million people in the developed world, huge number of hospital admissions each and every year. It's probably the number one reason people are hospitalized and rehospitalized. And all heart failure still to this day has a very high mortality rate, with a 53% mortality rate within 5 years of diagnosis. Interestingly, half of all heart failure, which is referred to as diastolic heart failure, where you get a fibrous and thickening in the ventricle muscle, which impairs the ability of the heart to fill properly, this area of heart failure has a mortality rate within 5 years over 75%. So it underscores the need for new innovative therapies to address the inflammation and fibrosis that impairs cardiac output, leads to a profoundly high mortality rate, hospital admission rate, and impact on quality of life. We just recently, or at the Heart Failure Society of America meeting that took place late last year, we presented some very compelling data concerning the new innovative therapy that we've developed to be administered on a subcutaneous basis, where in this two-hit model where diastolic heart failure is induced by a combination of hypertension as well as obesity. This model develops very high inflammation levels. The hearts they start to remodel, they become enlarged. And in this model system, we significantly inhibited the elevation of a number of prominent inflammatory markers that are elevated in patients with heart failure. We had a marked impact on prevention of cardiac remodeling. And one of the most striking findings that was unexpected is we also inhibited weight gain as well as heart weight gain through what we believe to be a significant reduction in visceral fat in favor of subcutaneous fat. So visceral fat, if you've heard of fatty liver disease, that's a metabolic fat that can accumulate around organs. It's a very dangerous situation because high levels of visceral fat are implicated in a higher risk for mortality for cardiovascular causes. And we were thrilled to have this observation that we significantly reversed and slowed the distribution and accumulation of this dangerous fat that can accumulate around organs, including the heart. And these data were consistent with our prior observation at the renowned DeBakey Heart Center, where we showed an impact on reversing fibrosis in cardiac tissue. This model system is a hypertension system. The hearts become fibrotic because they pump against vascular resistance of high blood pressure. And here at 2 different doses, the FDA-approved dose as well as 1/10 of that dose, we showed an amelioration of this fibrotic process, which was very compelling. So that is really a snapshot. We are now well positioned for a very exciting 2024 with our lead program, the Maverick study, now fully enrolled. We are positioned to report top-line results from this program in Q2 of this year. We believe this is going to position the company to accelerate our partnering discussions. We are engaged in discussions with many of the prominent players and the cardiovascular franchises and the key players in heart failure and metabolic syndrome. We also believe this will underpin entry into a pivotal registration trial, which will fast-track the development of our drug, which we believe is positioned to potentially become a new first or second-line therapy in this very debilitating condition. We will then follow the recurrent pericarditis effort with our second phase 2 readout. We plan to complete full enrollment into the acute myocarditis program and report top-line data from that study as a second key measure of the impact of our drug on cardiac inflammation and fibrosis. And then we plan to speed the development of this new subcutaneous formulation that we're developing, where we've just reported recently very exciting results across a number of different models of heart failure. And we believe this now will position this new drug agent to enter into clinical development with a potential target as large as diastolic heart failure, which is probably one of the largest medical challenges facing the developed world today, with an extraordinarily high mortality and morbidity rate and costs of care. In the US alone, heart failure can cost the US healthcare system over $30 billion annually. We're pleased to have assembled a distinguished team of management with extraordinary backgrounds across all the various disciplines. Over 30 years experience in medical affairs, research and development, clinical operations, business development, the scaling of production of new drug agents, and extraordinary talent on the regulatory side. I welcome everybody on this call to visit cardiolrx.com to read the profiles and the biographies on this distinguished team. We're also fortunate to have strong stewardship from a board of directors, of which 6 of 8 members are fully independent. And here we blend skills ranging from extraordinary talents from heart failure medicine to Wall Street background, pharmacology, pharmaceutical, finance, manufacturing, legal, and business. And then with respect to our scientific advisory panel, it's chaired by the renowned Paul Ridker, who's basically credited with discovering the role of C-reactive protein in increased risk for cardiovascular mortality. High levels of CRP are now recognized as an independent risk factor for higher risk of mortality and morbidity associated with cardiovascular disease. And it's really Paul's fundamental work that was credited for that. He's well recognized as one of the thought leaders in cardiovascular and inflammation. Bruce McManus has extraordinary talent in studying myocarditis, which is a young person's heart disease. And Joe Hill is the editor-in-chief of the prestigious journal Circulation for the American Heart Association, a post he's now held for over 5 years. And he's also well recognized as a key opinion leader in diastolic heart failure, which is the key focus of our next generation technology. So essentially, that's an update. I think the essence of 2024 and the key focus for this organization is to drive forward with our 2 important phase 2 programs, the lead one of which, the Maverick study in recurrent pericarditis, is now fully enrolled and positioned to read out its top-line data in Q2. We will then follow that with an equally important and equally challenging readout from the acute myocarditis Archer trial, which is a global effort to drive and bring about what we believe could potentially be the first standard of care for a life-threatening disease for which there is no recognized standard of care. Our scientific rationale around these medicines continues to grow with publications now throughout many of the preeminent research centers. And we continue to educate and present new scientific discoveries at various scientific meetings. We have an innovative research pipeline, which is now driving the development of a new innovative therapy to target inflammation and fibrosis in one of the great medical challenges, which is heart failure. We've developed a strong intellectual property to protect all of our assets. We have extraordinary leadership teams, scientific advisory panels providing guidance for this organization. And we're fortunate to be in a well-financed position with our ongoing development programs fully funded and operations funded into 2026. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their attention today, and I'll turn it back to address any questions folks might have.
Thank you very much. So currently there are no questions in the chat. Everyone is welcome to post questions. I have already a few questions, so I think it's really important for the viewers to understand what it means that, or the benefits of an orphan drug designation. So how does orphan drug designation benefit Cardiol Rx development and marketing strategy and its impact on regulatory and commercial plans?
Sure. So regulators around the world, including the Food and Drug Administration, adopted a program to basically incentivize the pharmaceutical industry and the life sciences industry to develop new important therapeutics for very devastating, very costly conditions that affect a rare number of people. So in the United States, an orphan designation is awarded for a new therapeutic intervention that can address debilitating forms of disease that impact the lives of less than 200,000 Americans at any one time. The advantages of this program is that this speeds the development path. Typically, instead of 2 phase 3 trials, companies only require 1 pivotal registration trial. It can compress the development cycle by several years. It provides companies with periods of market exclusivity that can range 7 to certain regions of the world over 10 years, which is very important barrier to competitive entry. Orphan drugs typically enjoy high levels of reimbursement, and they typically enjoy reduced development fees. So, for example, in the United States, a new drug application could cost several $1 million just to make the application. Most of those fees are typically waived for orphan drugs, and orphan drugs have a improved odds of being recognized as a fast track designation, which again accelerates. It really makes regulators a partner in speeding the development of new important medicines for diseases that affect lives of all age categories. In Cardiol's case, I think the real important feature is that these diseases take young lives. They affect a young demographic. A lot of people think of heart disease as a disease of advanced age. Well, in case of acute myocarditis, it is the leading cause of death by cardiovascular causes in people under the age of 35. And recurrent pericarditis typically affects people in their prime, in their 30s, 40s. When they're in their prime, they're typically healthy and athletic. Yet for reasons not fully understood in medicine, a virus can go to the heart and cause this inflammation, which can dramatically impair people's quality of life and increases risk for mortality.
Okay. And there's a question from the chat. So do you see your development on track or even better than expected with the recent news flow?
We're very pleased with our development track. We're actually enrolling our trials ahead of schedule. And that is, a testament to the great efforts of the Cardiol team and all of our clinical networks and all of the specialists that are involved in the program, as well as patients' willingness to participate in these programs, because there's an urgency to develop new important medicines to give better choice, better accessibility to new important therapies. In the case of acute myocarditis, where there is no standard of care, and in the case of recurrent pericarditis, where the biological therapies are immunosuppressive and they can be prohibitively costly. With respect to the US medicine, its list price was $240,000 per patient per year, and that medicine is not available outside of the United States, and it's well outside the scope of many reimbursement schemes around the world. So we're very pleased to be tracking ahead of schedule with respect to all of our development programs, which are designed to speed the development of this new important medicine and these therapeutic options for patients.
And I want all the investors to really understand what your company is all about. So maybe can you elaborate in simple terms on the specific mechanisms through which cannabidiol exerts its antifibrotic effects on cardiac fibrosis?
Sure. So essentially, what we've shown experimentally that we can, rather than completely block elevated levels of inflammation, we're working upstream. So we're physiologically modifying the production of certain chemicals in the body or certain messages in the body that can cause inflammation when they become at higher levels. So basically, irrespective of how we look at this molecule, it's not only cardioprotective, but it also inhibits elevated levels of inflammation, which can be very devastating for patients and folks of all age categories.
And in the context of heart failure treatment, how might it complement or replace current targeting inflammation and fibrosis?
So in the case of heart failure, diastolic heart failure, inflammation, fibrosis is implicated in this condition. There are therapeutic options available that try to take the load off the heart, try to improve the efficiency of the heart. But to date, there has not been a new drug agent developed to specifically target the inflammation and fibrosis, which is fundamental to the development and progression of a number of cardiovascular diseases. And that's where I think Cardiol differentiates itself. I think that's the great effort that we have underway here to deliver a new therapeutic option to layer on to the existing treatments. I mean, I think the high mortality rate associated with heart failure at 76% with respect to diastolic heart failure, a condition that affects millions of people around the world. I think that underscores the need for new therapeutic interventions to improve outcomes in this disease.
Okay, David, thank you very much. I think that helped a lot for everyone to understand what Cardiol is all about. But sadly, we just ran out of time. So thank you again.
Yes, thanks very much for having us back. Thank you.